We're going to talk this time about diet and liver disease. Liver disease is a growing problem in our country today, and most of it is what we call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. 70 to 100 million people in the United States have this disease right now. That means a fourth of our population has this disease, or a little bit more. And 10 to 25% of those will go on to develop a condition called non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. Hepatitis, of course, is much more serious. That's where your liver cells are so sick that they start dying and spilling enzymes that should be only inside the cells, outside the cells and into the blood, and then we pick up elevated liver enzymes in the blood. And that is something that unfortunately I see very frequently. Hardly a week goes by without seeing a patient that has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Unfortunately, this disease can progress to cirrhosis, and it raises a person's risk for liver cancer. I've had several patients die of this condition, and it's sad because it is completely preventable in the early stages of the disease and reversible even in the fairly moderate stages of the disease. Once a person, however, develops cirrhosis, it's not reversible. It is treatable to some extent, but it's certainly not reversible. So we have 70 to 100 million people at risk for developing cirrhosis, and this is a condition that can be treated in the early stages with diet. And that's what we want to talk about tonight. And I also will mention some other things that we can do with diet for other types of liver disease. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is basically caused by excess fat in the liver. And the liver is filled with triglycerides, that's a particular type of fat, laid down in the cells. The cells get so full of fat that they get sick, and then over time inflammation builds, and then they start dying, and then you've gone from fatty liver disease to steatohepatitis. When you progress from the fatty liver disease to the steatohepatitis, that progression occurs in the presence of high oxidative stress, or increased oxidation, and we'll talk about diet and that as well. The risk factors for this condition are, number one, older age. The longer you eat a bad diet, the higher your risk for getting this disease. Number two, diabetes mellitus. People with type 2 diabetes, we're speaking of specifically, are at higher risk for this fatty liver disease. And obesity itself. If your BMI is greater than 28, you are at quite high risk for this liver disease. Particularly if you're overweight and your weight is around your middle. If you're more pear-shaped and carry your weight on your hips and thighs, as some people do, your risk for this disease is not nearly as high as if you have the weight around your middle. In fact, if you're quite overweight but keep the weight down on your hips and thighs, your risk is still quite low. If you're just a little overweight but you carry it around your middle, your risk for fatty liver disease is still quite high. It's interesting that if you have this disease, not only are you at risk for cirrhosis and liver failure and liver cancer, but you're also at higher risk for death from coronary artery disease, because the two go hand in hand. Well, what is the basic reason that we get this disease? The reason we get it is we are eating a diet in which we can absorb fats and carbohydrates at such a rapid rate that our body has difficulty absorbing and processing and storing them. And as you know, or may know, the blood flow from the gut goes first to the liver. And if the blood leaving the gut and going to the liver is very rich in carbohydrate and fat, the liver tries to clear that from the blood and store it temporarily for processing and distribution later. But if we keep eating in a fashion that we absorb the fats and the carbohydrates very rapidly, then we can overwhelm the liver's defenses and pack that fat into the liver, and as we pack it in over and over, meal after meal, we overwhelm the liver's ability to process it, and then the liver starts to break down. The way, of course, that you avoid this disease and this condition is to avoid foods that have had the fiber taken out of them. Fiber is so important for us. It's important for many reasons, but one of the major reasons is fiber slows digestion and slows absorption of refined carbohydrates, and in fact they're not refined if they have the fiber with them, and it also slows the absorption of the fat. Now, if you are on a standard American diet, much of the fat you consume has no fiber with it. If you look at plants and fats, you'll find that all of the plants' foods that are high in fat naturally are high in fiber. Seeds are very high in fat. We get much of our oil from seeds. Nuts are high in fat. But seeds and nuts are also very high in fiber. And if you eat the whole nut, or if you eat the whole seed, even if it's ground up, you get all of that fiber, and it slows the absorption of the fat. If you eat fruit, it's rich in sugar, but if you eat the whole fruit, it's also rich in fiber, and it slows the absorption of that sugar in the fruit. Interestingly, fructose from fruit or from corn syrup, if it's refined and you throw the fiber out, is particularly good at raising your risk for this disease. You'll have a handout online there, and on that you'll see that if you have 1 can of soda a day, it will increase your risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease by 70%. And you say, that's an amazing increase. Just 1 can of soda, 70% increased risk. Why is that? It's that way because sodas are sweetened with corn syrup, and not just any corn syrup, but high fructose corn syrup, or if you prefer, high fructose corn syrup. And that is particularly good at forming triglycerides in the liver, and there's the fat that's laid down, and it's absorbed very rapidly, so it's almost all transferred over into fat deposited in the liver. Whereas if you took that same corn syrup, put it back into the corn, and ate the corn with all the fiber and all the antioxidants, even if you had the same amount, which would be a huge amount of corn, you wouldn't develop the fatty liver disease, because the fiber and the antioxidants in the corn would protect you from the development of fatty liver disease. That's true with fruit too. I had a patient a few years ago who came in with very high triglycerides. And he said, I don't understand this. I'm on a vegetarian diet. I shouldn't have high triglycerides. And he said, I have fruit every day. I said, okay, what form do you have the fruit in? Well, mostly in juice. Okay, so where did the fiber go? Well, the fiber got thrown out and he just was having the juice. And fruit juice will clearly raise your triglycerides almost as rapidly as soda will, because there's so little fiber in most juice. You think of apple juice, for instance. There's no fiber in apple juice. They strain it all out. And so that will increase your risk for alcoholic fatty liver disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, just as well as soda will. I misspoke and said alcoholic fatty liver disease. If you took the apple juice and made it into hard cider, it would give you the alcoholic fatty liver disease. Interestingly, alcohol is a refined carbohydrate. And if you took the whole grain or the whole apple or the whole grape and ate that rather than the refined carbohydrate, you wouldn't get alcoholic liver disease from that either. So it's a similar problem, although slightly different because of the toxicity of the alcohol itself. But the triglycerides go up in alcohol consumption as well. So if you have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or even early steatohepatitis, what do? Well, simply you add back in the fiber. And you say, well, how do I do that? Well, first of all, remember, as we've said before, animal products, meat, milk, eggs, cheese, fish, chicken, turkey, they don't have any fiber in them. There's no fiber in those products. And so while you may consume them, you're not going to help your liver and you're not going to help reverse this process when you eat them, particularly if they're high in fat, which they are. That's, you know, even a low-fat cut of meat or lean meat is still at least 50% of the calories in it are fat. And you can read on the label, well, it's 90% fat-free. Well, how did they calculate the percentage? Was it a percentage of the calories or a percentage of the weight? If you take the percentage of the weight, it can be 90% fat-free. At the same time, if you look at the percentage of fat in a lean cut of meat, if you're looking at the percent of calories, not weight, it's 50% fat. You see that with milk. You take whole milk and it says it's 96% fat-free. Well, 6% of what? Well, 2% milk has 2% of fat, but it's 25% of the calories is fat, and whole milk is 50% of the calories is fat. So even the low-fat animal products are often high-fat if you're looking at percentage of the calories as fat. So you have to be careful of those, and if you have the fatty liver disease, you don't eat them and think you're doing your body a favor, because they don't have the fiber that slows the absorption of the fats. And when you're eating plants, you can be on a strict vegan diet and still eat trash. You don't want to eat refined carbs or refined fats on a vegan diet, even if you're wanting to reverse this liver disease. Now, if you already have the fatty liver disease and you're trying to prevent that from going into the inflammatory state of it, or steatohepatitis, there's several things that really help to prevent you from progressing from fatty liver disease to steatohepatitis, which is the dangerous form of this. One is avoid oxidized cholesterol. So how do you oxidize cholesterol? Well, cholesterol, of course, is not found in plants. It's only found in animals. And in animals like you and me, most of the cholesterol is not oxidized. The body doesn't want the cholesterol to be oxidized, and it works very hard to prevent oxidation. But as soon as the animal dies, the antioxidants that the body makes, of course, stop being made, and then the cholesterol and other parts of our body, when we die, start to oxidize right away. And then we take that meat or that egg or whatever, and we do something to it to make it palatable. That is, we cook it. And when you cook something at high heat, you oxidize it. And we do this quite commonly when we grill meats or when we fry the eggs. We oxidize the product to some extent. And so the cholesterol is, much of it is in an oxidized form when we consume it because we've cooked it, particularly if we cook it at high heat. So another way to say avoid oxidized cholesterol is to say avoid cholesterol unless you're eating an animal product raw, which has problems too, as you know, from infections and palatability as well. So I could say reduce animal products if you want to lower your risk of moving from the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease to the steatohepatitis. Another thing that you can do to prevent that progression to the steatohepatitis is to increase your intake of antioxidants. And that's one of the reasons we demonstrated the summer vegetable salad, because it's very rich in antioxidants. It's got onions and garlic, which are from the allium family, and the allium family is particularly rich in antioxidants. It's got red pepper and parsley in it, and dillweed and basil. All of them have antioxidants in them. And so it's very good. And edamame beans also, and the yellow sweet corn. All of those colors, the antioxidants go with them, and so that's a great salad to eat if you're wanting to treat your liver disease and help prevent it going on to a hepatitis state. The other important thing, as I'm sure you picked up already, is to have a very high fiber diet, because the higher the fiber intake, the more slowly you're going to absorb those carbohydrates and those fats, and then you'll be able to process them normally and you'll do much better. The other thing that we want you to do is weight loss. Weight loss itself is very beneficial. The reason is when you lose weight, the first weight that you lose is from the intra-abdominal organs. So if you lose 10 pounds, the measurable fat in the liver already decreases, because that's where the fat is most toxic to us, and the body knows this and starts emptying out those fat stores first. So if you're 50 pounds overweight and you lose 10 pounds, and that's all you lose, that's still very important and very helpful at preventing the progression of this disease. So don't despair if you're 50 or 100 pounds overweight. You get a lot of benefit just by 10% of the weight loss, losing 10% of the weight you need to lose. So if you weigh 300 pounds and you really should weigh 150 pounds, you get a lot of benefit from losing 10%. That would be only 30 pounds. You think, well, I'm a 300 and I dropped to 270 and that isn't much and I should be down to 150. You get a lot of benefit from that first 30-pound weight loss. So losing 10% of your body weight if you're overweight may be enough to turn the tide against this disease. Of course, more weight loss helps more, but if we can stop the fatty liver disease before it goes to steatohepatitis, that's a great benefit. There's another statistic that's really interesting to me. I told you about the can of soda. 1 can of soda a day increases your risk of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease by 70%. 14 chicken nuggets a day triples your risk of moving from non-alcoholic fatty liver disease to steatohepatitis. And that's not very many chicken nuggets. But the reason for that is the fat in chicken nuggets has been heated at very high temperature. It's often oxidized. The cholesterol is oxidized. And so you cause inflammation in the system and push your liver from the fatty liver disease to the inflammatory state of steatohepatitis. Now at this point, if I had more of an audience, I'd take questions because I know you probably have quite a few of them. But since we don't have you here, I'll give you a few other things that you can look at for other types of liver disease. Regardless of the type of liver disease that you have, you want to do everything you can to avoid organic solvents. And one of those, of course, is alcohol. I have a patient who had alcoholic liver disease, and he was very ill with it. About 22 years ago, I had him in the intensive care unit in the hospital, and at first I thought he was going to die, and amazingly he pulled through even though he had very advanced alcoholic liver disease and cirrhosis. Amazingly, he stopped drinking and hasn't had a single drop of alcohol in the last 22 years. I sent him down to Boston, and he was on the liver transplant list for years, and he then was taken off of it. He's still alive and doing very well. His liver is still impaired, but it's working adequately, and he's doing very well. And what did he do? Simply avoided the organic solvent alcohol. But there are other solvents that we need to avoid to protect our liver, and you know many of these: benzene, toluene, acetone, paint thinners. Many of these solvents that we use are very difficult, are very hard on the liver. Gasoline, another organic solvent. Those types of compounds you want to do everything you can to minimize your contact with if you have liver disease. There's several specific types of liver disease that I'd like to mention. One of them is hemochromatosis. Hemochromatosis is a condition that affects many organ systems. One of them is the liver. And with hemochromatosis, the problem is your body absorbs more iron than you need. And if you have this, it's very important you get treatment, which is usually phlebotomy, that is drawing blood off that pulls iron out of your system. But it's also very important if you have hemochromatosis to avoid iron in your diet. And that's certainly red meat. It's also other iron-containing foods or foods that are high in iron. And also you'd want to avoid using iron pots or iron utensils, because in hemochromatosis and liver disease caused by it, the problem is too much iron in the body. Cirrhosis in general, regardless of the cause, you want to limit your salt intake. Often with cirrhosis, your proteins in your body are low, and you need to eat adequate protein. But because the liver is sick with cirrhosis, too much protein can push you over into real problems. So in people with cirrhosis, you really do benefit from seeing a nutritionist and having a very careful nutritional analysis so you can figure out exactly how much protein you need to maintain good nutrition, but not go over that amount and get into real problems with excess ammonia production, and you can actually go into a coma if you get too much protein in your diet. Another type of liver disease, or several others, involve bile and the bile ducts. There's sclerosing cholangitis and a few others. In these, a very high fiber diet is helpful. Fiber is essential to help the liver because the liver makes bile that it dumps into the gut. The bile helps us digest our fats, but it also carries toxins into the stool. And if we have a high fiber diet, the bile binds to the fiber and then is excreted into the stool. If the fiber isn't present, you reabsorb the fiber and you reabsorb those toxins again, and then the liver has to process them again, secrete them into the bile again, and you just concentrate those toxins. So a high fiber diet is to the liver what a high water intake is to the kidney. It assists the liver in getting toxins out of your body. So high fiber diet is very important because it keeps the bile moving and helps detoxify the liver. You also, with bile duct disease, want to have a low fat diet, particularly avoiding saturated fats. And if you're going to have fat in your diet, if you have bile duct disease, you want to use oils that are from kernels, like corn oil and flaxseed oil and sunflower oil and canola oil and olive oil. All of these come from seeds and are much easier to digest with lower bile levels, and that can be very helpful as well. I'm not recommending you eat a large amount of those, but if you use oil at all, which of course isn't necessary, but if you do use it, you'll want it from the seeds or kernel oils. One last liver disease that I'll mention is Wilson's disease. Wilson's disease is actually quite rare, fortunately. It's a problem similar to hemochromatosis in that there's too much of a metal, but in Wilson's it's not iron, it's copper. And so limiting copper-containing foods if you have Wilson's disease is very helpful. And those are foods like oysters, lobster, dark chocolate, leafy greens, unfortunately, can be high in copper. Not all of them are, but some of them are. And if you have Wilson's disease, again, very rare, and nothing to worry about with the greens if you don't have Wilson's disease. You'll want to avoid it. The other food that's quite high in copper is shiitake mushrooms. But again, Wilson's disease is very rare. Only a very few people have it. It's a genetic problem, and that is something that you'd want to be aware of if you had Wilson's disease. So in summary, for your liver, the best diet you can eat is one that has fat in it, sure, and carbohydrates, sure, but you want those foods accompanied by high fiber. So if you're going to have your carbohydrates, get them in the complete vegetable, the complete grain, the complete seed. You'll get your carbohydrates that way. Get them in fruits. If you're going to have fat, get it with the fiber. One of the best foods that's high in fat is actually avocados. They have been shown to help people with liver disease even though they're high in fat because they're also high in fiber. And nuts are the same if you eat the whole nut. Much better, of course, than eating oil from a nut or oil from the avocado because they've taken the fiber out of it. And that's very hard on you if you have liver disease. I hope you find this helpful. And if you have fatty liver disease, look for the fiber. You may want to do an assessment of your diet and see how many grams of fiber you're actually eating. It's recommended that we get to at least 20 grams of fiber a day, but if you have fatty liver disease, you may want to ramp that up to 30 to 40 grams of fiber. That's a lot of fiber. Try to avoid supplementing fiber. Rather look for high fiber foods that have the fiber in them naturally, and that's a much better thing for your fatty liver disease or any type of liver disease. Beans are an excellent source of fiber. They're one of the best. And seeds are also very rich in fiber. Of course, beans are a seed, and any type of seed you eat is rich in fiber. Nature packs it that way. Well, thank you, and I hope that this is helpful to you.